Middle Way Philosophy, Introductory Video 5b, Separating Absolute Belief from Archetypal Meaning, How Religious Life is Possible Without Supernatural Belief, by Robert M. Ellis. This is a tributary video to video number 5 on agnosticism. The middle way involves avoiding absolute positive or absolute negative beliefs on either side. Yet, at the same time, the middle way can involve the integration of meanings taken from either side, bringing them together to create a greater experiential whole. That whole idea of this depends on the distinction between meaning and belief, which will be the subject of this video, and which is capable of transforming our view of religion in the most positive fashion. So, what are meaning and belief? Most basically, we're talking about synaptic links in the brain. There are trillions of such synaptic links in the brain between the neurons that compose the brain. When we have a new experience, and particularly when we find that experience meaningful, we can link the neurons which are concerned with the experience with those which are concerned with the symbol. The new connection means that we appreciate in some way the meaning of the thing that we're talking about, and we are able to revive that link in future. So we're not computers reviving data, simply going through it in a computational fashion. Rather, each time we re-experience something meaningful, each time we remember, we live it again in some fashion. Belief consists basically in synaptic links that have become entrenched. They're entrenched so that we can use them as the basis of action, just as soldiers dig a trench so that they can continue the fight, and they can do so in a more effective and efficient way. So normally that entrenchment is very helpful for us. However, sometimes soldiers can dig their trench in the wrong place, or perhaps the enemy has moved, so the trench no longer becomes appropriate. It's at that point where belief needs to be flexible, where we need to have alternative synaptic links available to us to create new entrenchments. It is meaning beyond belief that provides these potential alternatives, these new possible ways of acting that we can imagine and think about without acting on them yet. It's essential to have a good web of these alternatives available to us, to have meaning, that is not actually on the basis yet of action. In this way of thinking about meaning and belief, belief grows out of meaning, not the other way round. The other way round, representationalism, is the traditional way of thinking about meaning and belief, which still dominates in most branches of philosophy and science. In the representational view, we start off with conceptual processing, which creates conditions for belief, and meaning consists of knowing when a belief will be true or not. But in the embodied meaning thesis, we recognize that meaning is laid down in the brain in connection to bodily experience. Out of that bodily experience, from early infancy, we start to construct basic categories and schemas. Out of those, we build metaphors and cognitive models. As we go on then, we build gradually more complex and more abstract ways of using language and other symbols, which all relate back in some way to our bodily experience, but are capable of considerable abstraction. It is only out of cognitive models that we build beliefs. For more details about the difference between these two ways of understanding meaning, see the video on embodied meaning and skepticism earlier in this series. Those who believe that belief comes first and meaning afterwards have great difficulty explaining the way in which myths and stories function, the way in which we relate to them. They have to invent a concept called suspension of disbelief. So it seems, for example, that when we see Gandalf in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, we somehow believe in him but don't believe in him. We have to suspend the disbelief that we would otherwise have. so that we enter into the world of Tolkien's creation on a temporary basis. This is an unnecessary construction if you think of meaning and belief as separate, and of belief growing out of meaning. The meaning can exist in an independent fashion. Meaning can be quite elaborate, just as elaborate as is shown in Tolkien's world. We can construct those elaborate meanings without them being entrenched enough for us to act on the basis of them. We're still not likely to go down to the pub looking for Gandalf, or expect to be attacked by orcs on the way. So if you think of myth and story as being experienced meaningfully, without any need to either believe or disbelieve in what it is that we find meaningful, hold that idea and apply it to the idea of archetypes. So it is archetypes that become the crucial forms of representation and symbolism used in religion, as well as widely in art and in culture and myth. So archetypes can only be described as psychological functions that are meaningful to the body through metaphor. The archetypes are metaphors in a way, but they're metaphors with a peculiar power because of the role they have for us, the way they represent our aspirations, things that we currently try to do, or things that we need to face up to, perhaps, that have some power in our psyches. There are 4 major archetypes representing different functions in the psyche. These can be related to the positive ego, that is, our desire to be ourselves, to develop an identity, to achieve, to get through difficulties. The positive other, that is, what we find attractive but different, often sexually different from ourselves. The negative other, that is, what we reject and find evil. And the integrated other, that which seems to be mysteriously whole, different from ourselves and yet the same, still containing ourselves. These 4 ideas can be related much more closely to particular myths, stories and religious symbols, as we'll see. The positive ego function is represented by the hero found in all kinds of stories and myths all over the world in different cultures. So the hero encounters difficulties in a story, and he or she overcomes those difficulties. Effort and difficulty are required, and the conclusion involves achievement, which can only occur because of the overcoming of difficulties. That's obviously part of our everyday experience, but it also relates closely to our aspirations, ideas of what we would like to be in future. Even if we don't want to be warriors, we may want to struggle in some other way, for example, in politics or in personal relationships. The positive other, however, is reflected in what Jung called the anima or animus. That is, for women, the animus is the male archetype representing the attractive other. The anima for men is the female archetype representing the attractive other. That other may take a sexually attractive form, or it may take a motherly or fatherly form. It may even take a more impersonal form. You can look at this picture and of course there are anima figures in it, attractive, alluring figures, for a man anyway. But the landscape itself could also be seen as an expression of the anima as a whole. The negative other, on the other hand, is what's known as the shadow, represented in theistic religions by Satan or his equivalents. In other religions and other mythologies, there are also roughly equivalent figures of evil, figures of fear and rejection. In stories, there are also villains who involve the same kinds of projections that we put onto the evil one. Then, finally, there is the integrated other, what Jung called the God archetype, or the self, or the wise old man or wise old woman. This kind of figure represents an aspect of ourselves which is potential. It's not how we are yet, but it is how we might be. It's the unrealized, integrated self that we might be. It's a quick foretaste of it, a glimpse into what we might be, and perhaps will never become. This figure is obviously ubiquitous in religion. It may take a personal form, or it may take an impersonal form. It may take a male or a female form, or it may be, for example, a mandala, according to Jung's analysis. Any of these archetypal forms, particularly God, can be absolutized and projected outwards, or they can be recognized as aspects of our own experience. The same applies to a whole host of other metaphysical ideas that are widely used. They're widely turned unnecessarily into the basis of beliefs, but we can nevertheless appreciate them as ideas with meaning. Truth, God, knowledge, Satan, good, nature, evil, infinity, eternity, creation, beauty. All of these involve much speculation when propositions are claimed about them, if they're believed to exist in some final way beyond experience. They do a lot of damage when they're used in that sort of way. But there's no need at all to reject these ideas as meaningless. They are entirely meaningful, and as meanings we can positively celebrate them and enjoy them. It's by appreciating them as meanings that we can, in effect, slake our thirst for this kind of meaning and avoid the unnecessary move onwards to metaphysical belief. These kinds of archetypal symbols and ideas, when turned into basis of belief, become absolutized and thus only have the function of reinforcing group approval, group dynamics. On the other hand, if we can hold these kinds of ideas only as meanings and hold back from turning them into beliefs, then they can have a practical impact. They can make a difference to the beliefs we actually hold, and thus to the way we live our lives. Here's an example of that. Gerard Manley Hopkins was a deeply religious poet who lived in the 19th century. He, of course, held religious beliefs, but they don't intrude into his poetry very much on the whole. On the whole, it's much more likely that what you'll find in his poetry is a practical impact of the meaningfulness of God and the meaningfulness of other Christian symbols to Gerard Manley Hopkins. Let's look at this poem, which is called God's Grandeur. It's about the way in which Hopkins sees the world differently because of God. Not that he's developed new propositions about the world which are different because he's believing God. Rather, he has a different enriched experience of the world and thus of his practical activity in the world because of the use of this overwhelming meaning for him. God's grandeur. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things, and though the last lights off the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. This focus on the meaning rather than the belief of religion is in Christianity particularly found in the mystical tradition. In this picture by Hildegard of Bingen, for example, it seems that the experience of God is being recognized as primarily a physical, bodily experience of a human being. Such experience doesn't in any way limit or lessen God. God can be just as sacred, terrifying, bounteous, infinite, loving. Whatever attributes one experiences of God are, of course, just as awe-inspiring as they ever were. These are attributes of God's meaning. You don't have to turn them into beliefs. This can be contrasted with the effect of believing in God or believing in any other absolute metaphysical thing. The process can be considered as by the metaphor of a projector. It's as though the world was a screen, or particularly other people perhaps are the screen on which the idea of God is projected. We see the world in terms of it being this way or that way, and other people who think differently as being absolutely wrong. We project that belief also onto human individuals. We may project God onto somebody who is authoritative, or of course we may also project the shadow onto somebody who we hate. When God or other religious symbology is projected outwards as a belief, it hardly needs pointing out that this is a recipe for conflict, particularly as we see God as being intrinsic in things out there, for example, the words of a scripture or the authority of a leader. And we are opposed to those who don't believe in these things or believe in alternatives. Belief in God, therefore, has overwhelmingly negative effects, given that this can be entirely separated from the meaningfulness of God with its potentially positive effects. So, to summarize, belief is a strong synaptic connection that can, at least potentially, be used for action, whether that's a specific practical action or just the reinforcement of group belief. Meaning, on the other hand, is a weaker synaptic connection, offering wider potentialities and alternatives. Belief is dependent on meaning and indeed is built out of meaning, not vice versa as commonly believed. Archetypes are meanings relating to universal human functions. Archetypes can be fully experienced and can modify our judgments without being objects of belief. But metaphysical belief, on the other hand, in archetypes as supernatural objects, is a harmful projection, causing repression and conflict.